Hey, Nikita, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Cynthia. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I never talked about podcasting on the podcast, which feels kind of like, why hasn't this happened yet after almost, 250 episodes? You'd think I'd get around to that. But yeah, I think we met through, was it Lunch Club? No, it was maybe through a contact in common. And we started talking about our podcast, and I'm like, we need to talk about podcasts on a podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk about the podcast a bit on my podcast, but not like I don't think I've actually had an episode on like how to start a podcast. Or even like podcasting. Like I don't really
Right.
think about it either. It's just something that we do.
Right. Yeah, me too. I just do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience, and then we can talk about podcasting.
Yeah. Well, my name is Nikita Williams. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, here in the United States, and I am a clarity and confidence coach for service-based creatives and women living with chronic illness. And I have a podcast called She's Crafted to Thrive. We've been around since 2017, and we talk about topics like living with chronic illness and growing a business, and what does that feel like, and how to different tools from marketing to a life point of things. So I'm just excited to talk about podcasting because I am very grateful that I was introduced to podcasting because it's just made marketing and creating content like super easy for me and a way to show up when I can't always be like on camera or whatever the case may be. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's so. I mean, I have my own like inspired to create a podcast story, but what was it for you that was like, I need to have a podcast? What happened in your world?
Well, it wasn't even like I need to have a podcast. I didn't know anything about podcasting. Like it's so funny. Like when I think about it, I'm like, people are like, Nikita, you're so good at it. I'm like, I think it's just because naturally I love talking, connecting with people. But when I had first started my business online, my challenge was content. It's like, how do I create content? I have no idea. Like showing up on social media every single day was not something I wanted to do.
Right.
And it's easy to get burnt out on social media. And so
Totally.
the thing at the time was like blogging, you should blog. And I'm not a writer. Like that's not like my easiest way to communicate and articulate what I feel or think or share my expertise. But I did try it. I totally did, but I tried it with like having a Zoom call like we're having right now,
Right.
like we did like an interview and I would type out the interview. Oh my goodness, was that painstaking? And I remember telling my husband, I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is too much. Like, this feels like it takes me forever to write a blog of a conversation that I just had. Like, and I just use this. He's like, why don't you just start a podcast? And I was like, what's that? And he's like, you don't know what that is? I was like, no, I don't. Don't know what it is. He's like, it's basically what you're doing now. You're just going to use the audio. And I was like, wait, what? And it came at a time like I had just had a surgery that kind of put me in like staying home for a couple of months. And I used to like do networking events. So it just felt like I was doing networking events all the time on Zoom with someone and then like recording the call and then popping it up on my podcast. And I was like, this is like amazing.
Right.
And being able to reuse that content in different ways. At one point, I've even had my VA taking some of it to create a blog post from. I didn't have to do anything. So
Yeah.
it's fun. It's easy. It's also been like kind of partially for me, the style of my podcast has been kind of like a healing emotional journey of like just talking
Yes.
about living with chronic illness and
Yes.
growing. So it's like the best thing of all the things.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
No, you don't have to convince me. No.
Yeah.
I say so for me, my story is that I at the time was working with a coach who had a podcast. And that podcast, for those of you who are curious, it was Tiffany Hahn. I can't remember what her, because she changed the name of it later. So anyway, Tiffany Hahn is a business coach. And I remember listening, and I was at the beginning of my business, at the beginning, you're just like looking for these people to like push you forward, pull you forward, whatever, get you to where you want to go, because you're like building this dream that you're like, is this even possible? Like, I'm crazy for doing this, you know? And so I remember just having Tiffany in my ear almost every day, and I was just obsessed with her voice and like the way she was just so inspiring. And that was like, man, it's so easy to connect with this person if I'm listening to their voice. And it's a very different connection than if, like you said, if I'm reading their website or if I'm reading their emails or whatever. And it just feels like I have her like in my life, you know? And I
Yeah.
love that. Like, it was just such an intimate, especially when you're starting your business at the beginning, you know, many times it's very lonely. Like, you're not, it's not like you have coworkers. And even if you have a team, it's usually remote. So having that connection with someone so close just was so powerful. And I love that. And so that was my like, wow, I'd love to do that for other people. Right. And then same as you, like, I love conversation. I love talking, as long as I'm not being interrupted. And so podcasts, you could do solo shows, right? And just like talk. No one will interrupt you. That doesn't mean you should do long episodes, but you know what I mean. Um, so that was my start with it. But I'm gonna be honest, at the beginning, it was not super good. Like, I think it took, I mean, so I'm curious, like, how do you feel like your progression was? Because a lot of people say to me, like, I don't know how to, like, how do I interview people? How do I just, for some people, it's like, it's hard to let the words flow. Did you find that? Or how did you feel like that was a progression for you? Like the first maybe 100 episodes, right? And getting warmed up in that way.
Yeah, I will say that for me, I kind of had a leg up in that area because I had grown up where like since I was like a kid, I was a part of I'm still am a part of like a public speaking kind of thing to know how to speak and then also how to really engage in conversation. So for me, that wasn't a challenge because it was something I was doing already in my everyday life, but to
Right.
translate that into podcasting, I definitely like from a standpoint of like not knowing anything about podcasting to having a show where I was interviewing people. If you go to episode 1 and you listen to episode, 100, it's completely different. Like, you can definitely hear the progression of like,
Yes.
okay. But I also feel like it has been, to me, this is the only medium that gives you the flexibility to be like so imperfectly imperfect. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like it's the
Yes.
thing that I think people enjoy. They
Yeah.
enjoy the rawness, even if it is clean audio. They like the realness that you were just talking about, like having that
Mhm.
real connection with
Yeah.
someone. It's a different it's a different connector than like watching a video, than like watching a TikTok or a reel or something. Like it's
Right.
just more authentic. And so for me, I really just embraced that part of the process.
Yes.
And I feel like my audience felt the same way. Like they didn't feel, I mean, for a while, and I still every now and then like do my own editing. Some editing sounds really bad. I've gotten way better at that. And then there are times where it's like, my audience is like, that was just a really great episode about some real heavy stuff. And they don't care what the audio sounds like. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I just think podcasting gives you that freedom that even
Mhm.
though, am I better now as far as like all of the editing and how to kind of move a conversation on? Absolutely. But I don't think about that like too much with podcasting.
Yeah. No, no, I love that. And that's what I feel a lot of people get stuck in, this perfectionist loop of like, I think maybe the first 50 episodes I took the time, or maybe less. I took the time and I would edit out the ums and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And it drove me crazy. And then I was like, I can't do this. This is not sustainable. Like, I either have to like make a budget for some like audio engineer, and that's not gonna happen, or I have to just get better at, like you said, maybe pausing, learning how to breathe in an episode.
Mhm.
But those were all skills that, yeah, it just, as time went on, like I would just get better at, and also pay attention to how I want it to sound. And then, yeah, I agree. I feel like there's so much room to play with that, because if someone likes the message, they're gonna get, like, they won't really care, how you get it across, right? In many ways. As long as, I feel like if you're doing super, super long episodes, I mean, it could be a little bit different story, but yeah,
Well, Cynthia, my episodes are usually like, if it's a guest interview, it's usually 45 minutes. My episodes where it's just me, it's like 20 minutes, sometime
yes,
pushing it to 30. But even with that, like I just have found there was a time in my journey where I felt like I had to have like an episode every week. And it was really stressful. Like it was so stressful because you felt like you always had to have content, especially when you're first starting out with a podcast. You want to somehow feel like all of these people are listening to the whole episode and every episode that you produce.
right,
And I realized like over time, it's like actually when I produce less, the greater my numbers would go up, my greater the downloads, because people could actually listen and like pause and come back to it, and I feel like they're missing on the next thing. And that's been like specifically my audience. Everybody's audience is different, but
yeah,
I think that's the power of podcasting, is that when you create and grow a community, having a podcast based on like your specific story, your niche, and your expertise, they just become accustomed to like that's your thing. Like that's, we know this is going to be a long episode. Like on my show, they know there's a guest and it's like a really juicy topic. They're going to be coming back and listening to the rest of it. Like they're not going to listen to it all the way through
right.
the first time, but they definitely listen to it. And so I think that is like learning that your audience will grow, and your cadence of how you decide to show up with the podcasting is the power of podcasting. That does not happen often on social media. You don't have that kind of power because there's so many other people, taking their attention. And I don't know about you, but I don't actually listen to a lot of podcasts. I only listen to a handful because they're the ones that make the biggest difference for me. And so I feel the same thing is the case with the people that listen to my show, is like they're not feeling the pull to listen to like thousands of podcasts. They're listening to the ones that make the biggest difference for them.
Oh, yeah, I love that. No, it's so true. And it's so true. For me, my top episodes aren't the ones that I've recorded this year or even last year. I think they're like more than 3 years old, some of them. Uh, and that blows my mind. That blows my mind because
Yeah.
I don't have to, I mean, I did all that work in the past, but that again, yeah, social media, if we compare it, it's like we're almost trained. Like I have to remind myself with other types of marketing, social media is like always something new. You're like pumping into this platform. And like, yeah, podcasting, SEO as well, which is what I do. But there's other types of marketing where it's like it's not about daily. Actually, daily is worse because the quality won't be the same, right? It's actually about doing less, and having it be more powerful. And then that actually is like an investment because that serves you for the next 5 years in your business, which a lot of people aren't thinking about or talking about. It's like, what is the marketing that's gonna, just keep bringing in leads, like not this year, not next year, like 5 years from now, right?
Yeah. And you bring up such a good point. I think, especially from my niche, like the woman who's like, I don't have the capacity all the time, depending on my flare-ups or my
Mhm.
pain, or even if you just have really a busy life, you're a
Mhm.
mom, or you're a single parent, or you have a full-time job and you're doing a side hustle, like
Right.
showing up in a way like on social makes it harder because you're like trying to catch up with all of the stuff, right? Versus a
Yeah.
podcast is very much like a blog where it can serve people now or 5 years from now. Like it's
Right.
there and they can go there and they can find it. And the SEO, I think, too, part of the podcasting world now, especially more so over the last few years, the power of that is huge. Like you're right. I have like my first, like some of my best episodes are the ones that are like I did like 3 years ago. It cracks me up because I like
Yeah.
look at that on my stats. I'm like, how is that episode still trending up? Like, or those episodes, like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people find me all the time. They're like, yeah, I heard this episode you did. I'm like, which one? And they're like, I think it was like episode 50. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, okay. So yeah, so true.
Yeah, I love that. No, and that I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't initially choose podcasting for that reason, but intuitively it feels really good and it feels easy for me to continue to like you said, like respect kind of what my audience wants because I don't want to give off this impression of like you just publish or a podcast episode and then you never show up ever again. Like you need to find that rhythm
Yeah.
where you are showing up for your audience, but it's just completely different than it. I feel like social media, if we compare it again, not to bash on social media, but I'm always kind of showing people other options, especially as an SEO expert. um Social media feels very reactive, like you have to like with the algorithm, you have to like find the thing that the algorithm wants and you're like, doing all this. um Even if you're batching content, it still is like a lot. While a lot of like something like podcasting can just, you're like in control. Like if you want to do one episode a month and it's like a super juicy one, you can. Like it's not
Yeah.
like the podcast, there's no podcast algorithm, right? So it's not like you're gonna get like downgraded because you're doing a thing once a month.
Yeah. I think with podcasting, what I have found, and I don't know, there is an algorithm, but it's not like the algorithm on social media.
Right.
It's kind of, I feel like podcasting reminds me of like your email list. Like it's the place that
Yes.
has one of the most powerful. I was reading some stats recently because I do a little um master class on podcasting, and it's like when people listen to podcasts, 80% of them are more likely to take action from listening to a podcast than any other medium,
Wow.
which is like,
That's crazy.
it's crazy, right? So, like, you can give a call to action in this podcast right now, and likely most of the people will take some kind of action, right? And so, I think it's really the leveraging around, especially if you are in a health and wellness kind of place, of realizing that um your power in an episode is like a longer term of
Yes.
actual um ROI, or I like calling like ROE, like return of energy, because
Yes.
it's a lot less draining to even batch like several podcast episodes, right? Like it's just like, okay, you're putting it up and like you're recording and then it's over here and you
Yes.
have your little format of however you do it, and then you release them over a period of time. Like you're
Yeah.
not like trying to catch up with, like you said, it's not reactionary. So it's a way to provide value. It's a way to create a need, or also like a what's the word? Oh, Cynthia, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a desire maybe, or
Urgency.
an
It creates
urgency.
urgency without you having to be on a platform that is forcing urgency. Like
Yes.
social media to me is like forcing this feeling of like, and don't get me wrong, Nikita loves some social media. Like I love
Yeah.
me some social media. I'm like on Instagram every day. Like that's a thing. But if I ever have a time in my life where I don't want to be, or I need to not be on social media,
Yeah,
I have no fear because I have my podcast. Like I feel like
exactly.
it will serve that engine as well. So
I think it's about finding what I like to say to my clients is you need to find different marketing that balances each other
yeah.
out. So if you're gonna go all in or whatever, you're gonna go into Instagram, something like that. I would recommend getting really honest of like, what's your goal? Like, what are you going to sustain for the next 90 days? Because being on Instagram every day for 90 days, for some people, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So why don't you also think about investing in some podcasting or some SEO, and you have 90 days of doing that, because that's also going to have another sustainability with your return on your investment or return on your energy. I love that too. So I think a lot of people kind of set themselves up for failure because they're trying to do all of the things all at once, and they're not investing in different types of marketing that has different rhythms, right? Of how it, brings in leads and all that. And again, if you want your business to serve you years in the future, whether you change and pivot, it doesn't matter. Like things like podcasting can still bring you leads, even if you're offering something a little different. Because a lot of people are also like, oh, like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 years. It doesn't matter. People are going to be finding you. They're going to listen to your voice. They're going to connect with you. Like that's a lead. Like that's someone who's in your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the thing about the changing like what you do, again, I go back to that point of podcasting being so much more forgiving. Like when I first started my podcast, it was very much like I wasn't really talking about chronic illness because I wasn't in the mind space about that. Um, but it has definitely evolved to that, and it's just gotten better. Like you know, like it's just made it better, and it's also made it easier for people to relate to the human factor of being a human. Like we all will change and evolve over time. And so what our offers and what we do now, even if you decide to pivot into doing like a different niche, you could still like, depending on what the niche is, if there's some like overlap, you can just tell your audience you're changing into that niche and just keep going. Or if you wanted to start a new like a new podcast, you could easily bring those, you know, bring the people that need to be serving in that new podcast as well. It's just a much easier place to transition from and through.
Yeah, no, it's true. I haven't changed my logo branding for my podcast I've been wanting to, but that doesn't stop the downloads or anything. Like people see my face and the logo is kind of small. Like obviously on a phone, it comes up a little big, but it's fine. It's clean. Like you can read it. But yeah, I'm almost like, it's so cool that like, yeah, my podcast numbers just keep growing. And like, I don't have to focus on that, you know? Once in a while, I'll do like a new intro. Like if I'm wanting to change that intro part so that it really reflects who I'm helping, I'll do that. But those are details again to like what you're giving in the episodes, how you're connecting with your audience and what you feel when you're recording as well, those episodes. Like people can tell if you're having fun and you're like having a conversation that's lighting you up. Like that's what really kind of gets transmitted in the episodes.
Yes, I agree with that 100%.
So what do you feel has been like the biggest learning for you now? I don't know how many episodes you have in your podcast, but like with all the episodes, like what's been the biggest learning?
We just had our 100th episode, right?
Oh, cool.
Because we do bi-monthly versus every week.
Cool. Oh, I love it. So good.
So I would say my number one learning is not to overthink it. Like I honestly feel like sometimes if you listen to podcasts, you can start overthinking it. You can start like, oh, it needs to sound like this, or it needs to be like this. And all of those different kind of things start to interrupt your thoughts of your authentic way of doing a podcast. And intentionally, I don't listen to podcasts. And if anyone I'm working with is like, I want to start a podcast, I actually tell them, stop listening to all podcasts. Like just stop, because it does influence how you show up. And since podcasting is such an authentic medium for you to like connect with your audience. It's the number one tip I tell people all the time. I'm like, if you wanted to start a podcast and you're listening to podcasts, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to be in your head so much about it that it will shift the way you really want to show up. Right. And it will have an effect on you. So I definitely think if there's one thing that I've learned, is definitely authenticity is the most important thing to podcasting. Like the realness of that, and also honoring like your audience, because your audience is the ones who are listening, and like really engaging them. I know it sounds like weird to try to engage your audience because they're just listening to your stuff, but I think if you're asking them to share information with you, like DM you or email you or whatever, you're building this like really close kind of relationship with your audience, and they're listening to you. Like you don't not know that they're listening to you. So that's the one thing. I say one thing, I'm at like 2 or 3 things at this point, but all of those things are really important. And I think the number one tip is literally be you, and like own your story and your authenticness. And that is the key to like having a successful quote unquote podcast.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I would say for me, and it kind of connects with what you're saying, is like give yourself time to just experiment with your voice. Because when I started, I would been listening to this coach and I did kind of imitate her style. And then over time, I just allowed myself to like, let's just try doing episodes this way. Let's try doing episodes this way. And it freaked me out because I did have, like, I didn't want to be opinionated, right? Like, when you don't want to choose a side, at least for me, that's struggle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, Cynthia, like, I need to choose a side. I need to choose my voice because that's going to attract the right people, the right clients, the right audience. And it's going to repel people who aren't meant to be in my world. And that's fine. But it took me time to gain the confidence to really speak into my voice and get opinionated about certain things and get kind of like, kind of like, I know it all sort of things about this.
Mhm.
And just really get out there and be visible with that. And that is like a practice, and it's still a practice. Like there's things about SEO that I don't want to like, I'm like, oh, I really believe this, but it's scary to like define myself in this way. But I realize that that's what people, I guess it's not about being opinionated, like I do know it all. It's more about this is like what I want to say, right? Because if you're going to be vague, you're just not going to really connect with anybody. And so it's important to take that time to experiment. Like, what is the message? What is the mission here? And I think that's going to also, it's just going to take time to evolve and yeah, connect with that. Like at least a few episodes, I'd say to really like find that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a good point too. Like, it is like in the context of marketing, it is very much similar to all marketing, which is like meant to repel and attract. It's
Yeah.
doing two different things. But if your content is like sounding like anything they could have read off of any like Wikipedia site, then how often are people going to stick around, right?
Right.
So I definitely, I think both of what we're saying, what ties into it is like really owning your unique point of view
Mm-hmm.
and not
Yeah.
being afraid to share that with people um is important, because those are the things, right? Those are the nuggets that are the things people are like, oh, she's totally the person I get and I'm down with, versus that you're not, right? And here's the thing also I've had to learn is like, it's okay that sometimes you change your mind. So there are
Oh my
things in
God.
my
Yes.
podcast like that I've
Yes.
been like, yeah, da, 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 and then later I'm like, yeah, now that I think about it, y'all, I don't think that way no more. Like, not that way. And I think just being okay with being real and humble and people are like, yeah, because that happens to them too. Like, I feel like we can't change our minds when we experience those kind of things. But
Absolutely. No, but that's the point. Like, I think through the act of podcasting, it's like it's like practice. Like it's a final thing that I'm putting out there. But each episode is also like me practicing, like, what do I believe in? What are my, values, right? That I want to give, through my business. And then I get it wrong. Like I get to try something and be like, no, that episode, it's still online and everything, but that's not like, that was just an experiment. And I think a lot of people, like, they think they have to get it perfect on the first try. And a lot of marketing is also like, it just, I don't know. There's definitely on social media, it can feel like hard to practice or experiment. Like it just feels like you need to just do it perfect from the beginning.
yeah, I think that's true, but I think that's more of a mindset thing. Like, I feel like everybody is trying to figure out, if we really think about it, everybody in every platform of marketing is just trying to figure out what is going to work.
Yes.
And I think if you approach, even if, going into the thought of social media, like if you think about it, like, yeah, everyone is just trying to figure it out, it kind of takes off the pressure. It's the same thing with podcasting. Everyone is trying to figure out, are there people who have figured it out because they tried enough different things? Of course. But it helped, like it worked for them because they did the trying, right?
Yes.
They found their thing. And it's the same thing for us. It's like everyone is trying to figure it out.
Oh, so good. Your coaching coming out of the episode. I
Yeah,
got a free
it
coaching
comes out
session
and
there.
I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, so good. Oh man, I feel like that reinvigorated my own like marketing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So just like last kind of question, wrapping things up. So what's like one tip you'd give to someone who has a podcast, or maybe is like thinking of starting one, and they're trying to like figure out how to connect it with their business, and like, is this something I want to do? Because it can feel like a strategic, like for me, it was not strategic to start my podcast. It was like, I just like talking. I like this idea of recording myself. This might bring me leads, but honestly, I didn't even think about it that way. It was more like, this sounds like fun. But yeah, how would you guide someone who's like looking at it from that point of view? Or if they even should be
Well,
looking at it from that point of view.
no, I definitely think there are different roads when it comes to podcasting. Like
Yes.
when I first started my podcast, it definitely wasn't like I was just trying to create content. Honestly, that
Yes.
was my whole thing, and connecting with people. That was my whole reason why I started it. As time has progressed, it continues to shift based on like what's happening in my business or my personal life. What is
Yeah.
it going to be?
Right.
But if you already know that podcasting is like the vehicle you want to use to connect with your audience and create leads, there are tons of resources out there to help you. I definitely think, though, first going into it, you have to know your purpose. Is it a purpose to nurture your current audience and turn them into leads? Or is this a gathering kind of thing where you're trying to bring people into your world? And that would also include not just podcasting, but also being on other people's podcasts.
Yes.
So really knowing the intention and the purpose of your podcast is really important. And for me, because I do it as a purpose of like connecting, nurturing, and turning leads into
Mm-hmm.
clients, I feel like having clear call to actions and having really clear problem solving things when it comes to your podcast is really important,
Yeah.
for it to do well. And so from the context of creating leads specifically. And so
Right.
when you know the intention of what your podcast is going to be about, then it should help format, or not format, it should help inform your content. It
Decision.
should help inform your call to actions. It should help inform like how you are going to use the content you're creating your podcast outside of the podcast world.
Right.
So I definitely think just being very intentional about what are you using your podcast for, especially when you are doing it for your business. What aspect of your business are you using it for?
Right.
As
Yeah.
relationship, growth is different from like lead generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can be several things that can evolve over time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
another thing. Again, like you don't have to get it perfect from the beginning in terms of the purpose.
Yeah. And when you first start, I think you have to choose. You have to choose a lane to try and be like, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing. And also give yourself permission, like, this is not permanent. It's an experiment and we're going to play around. But if you're definitely doing it because of business, I definitely think you have to kind of like go into it with the mindset of what are you doing it for?
Yeah. Actually, now that you say that, I did have a little bit of strategy, and like I knew I liked talking and that, but I was like, this was my thought process. Everybody loves to be interviewed. Like everybody likes to be shown, right? Like that exposure. So when I was thinking about, because at the beginning I only did guest shows. And so I was like, I want to be able to talk to this person that are potential clients, or are businesses that can connect me with potential clients. And so I had my like dream podcast guest list.
Yeah.
And I was always like kind of looking for opportunities to pitch them strategically when they had stuff going on. And I actually got to interview some pretty cool people because I found like the perfect timing of like they were launching a book or they were launching a course. And so I would pitch them with that, and I would say them, hey, I noticed you're launching your book. I would love to feature it on my podcast. They didn't care that I had like 5 downloads at the time, right? Like they just wanted to be on things. And that's like a little tip, but that was strategic. I was like, if I could get on the phone with these people and they could learn about what I do, like that's a win, right? So
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that you said that, Cynthia, because for me, especially this past 2 years with the pandemic, it has been, I shifted my podcast from being like kind of like this nurturing to being my foot in the door, right?
right.
So depending on the people I've had on my show, which I feel pretty proud that I've had some like in my niche, like people that are big names,
Mm,
that if I wanted to be on a summit, or if I wanted to like speak at a summit or do a digital summit or be in a like a physical location or to coach for somebody's program, I could easily say, well, I have this podcast and this is what I sound like, this is what I talk about. I've even had such and such guests. Or if I was looking for like a foot in the door, I could reach out to that guest and be like, hey, I'm looking for an introduction to such and such.
right.
And it literally has been a thing that has literally gotten me on stages and like rooms that there's no way. Like I tell people, like, there's no way I think I would have gotten into those rooms without
Right.
my podcast being like a leverage. So
Exactly.
that's what I mean, like what we're talking about, like knowing what do you want to use your podcast for,
Hmm.
to do for your business or for your life, even like whatever it can be done, just choose, right?
Yeah.
And that has definitely been, like, for me this past year, it's been amazing. Like I cannot believe how many things I've done just because I'm like, yeah, I had a podcast and they're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure, come on in. I'm like, I don't have 5,000 people on my list, but I do have a podcast. And like, oh great. And I'm like, oh, okay, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. Again, it's got so many purposes, and yeah, it's for me it's been very life-changing, like on a personal level, but it's also
Mhm.
been obviously very strategic, and on a business level it's, helped me. And
Yeah.
yeah, the clients, when they hear you talk, they immediately know, like, oh, do I want to like work with her or not, or do I want to work with her team? So it creates that personal connection that it's not quite the same on other platforms.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Oh, so good. All right, Nikita, where can people hang out with you? Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can find me anywhere on the social media and online as Thrive with Nikita. And my podcast is called She's Crafted to Thrive. But if you find me anywhere on Thrive with Nikita, you will find a link to my podcast. So you don't really have to remember that. But um, yeah, if you're looking for, or if you know someone who is living with chronic illness and building a business, I know a lot of people in the health industry. It's so funny. A lot of coaches I talk to, especially health coaches, usually start their health coaching business because of living with chronic illness and finding tools to support them. And so I love interviewing those type of women. And I also love supporting them as a coach to like really create a business that serves their life versus their business taking away from their life in some
Right.
ways. And so yeah, I love to connect with anybody who wants to find me. I definitely am on DMs and Instagram. Like you can definitely chat with me there, but um it's fun. That's why I'm
We
on social
didn't
media.
bash Instagram too bad. We just a little bit.
Yeah, I like it. I love social media of what it can do for your
Yeah.
business, but I feel like now with so many platforms and so many people using them, like I I mean, I have a background in digital marketing, so 2017 social media was completely different than what it is now. And so podcasting to me gives you the power to leverage social media in a way to grow your audience, especially if you
Yes,
have a podcast. Yeah.
totally. I love it. Oh, so good. Thank you.
Thank you.